anybody talking about ending free trade? No, nobody's talking about ending free trade. So, and that's unfortunate. This means this problem is going to last and last. Wages have to rise. They have to catch up with extremely high productivity for demand to rise to the level of supply. All right, two lines. The U.S. real wage has been stagnant or even falling. So, in the absence of other changes, what will happen? In the absence of other changes, we have supply greater than demand. And that's the problem right now. Now, U.S. wages have been stagnant since about 1980-81. But, of course, productivity has not been stagnant. Productivity has been rising since, for a long time. It rises every year, right? It has been rising for the past 200 years. So now the question is, how did the economy maintain its balance after 1981? See, productivity was rising, wages were not. Still there was economic balance. After all, the current crisis that we have started this year. Not right after 1980. So how has the economy maintained its balance even though supply was ahead of demand because of stagnant wages? Very simple. It's not the economy that has maintained its balance. It's the government policy that has maintained this balance. You see, there is another way to raise demand also. It's an artificial way, not a natural way, but there is another way out. If you want to follow policy that restrain wages, how do you maintain supply-demand balance? Create new debt. Debt also raises demand. You make people borrow money. When they borrow money, they will spend it, raise consumer demand. That has been the magic formula that the governments have been using since 1981. Create more and more debt in the economy. All sorts of debt. Government debt on one side, consumer debt on the other side, corporate debt on the third side. So create more and more debt. So what will happen? Demand will rise to the level of supply, and you will maintain balance. Now, what would have happened if the government had not followed this policy of creating more debt? Now, those who are students of economics, they will know that they use very nice sounding words to describe this debt-creating policy. They call them monetary policy or fiscal policy. I don't know if anybody knows about it, but I'm an economist, I know. We call them monetary policy or fiscal policy and create an aura that the economists are geniuses, they know what they're doing, but essentially what it is the policy to create more debt. Now, it does not take a genius to know that debt creation cannot go on forever. But that's what you will need, because productivity rises every year, and if wages don't rise, then you would need debt creation to go on forever. And that is simply impossible. That is simply impossible. But they kept creating debt. Alan Greenspan was the mastermind behind this debt-creating policy. Alan Greenspan was the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, and he was worshipped by the whole world. for creating prosperity. The so-called prosperity was actually debt-based prosperity. It wasn't even prosperity, because what was happening was people at the very top were flourishing, and the other half of the people were languishing. Their wages were not rising at all. In fact, their wages were falling. The real wages were falling. But through this debt creation policy, he maintained the balance between supply and demand. If they had not maintained this balance, they would not have been reelected. In democracy, the officials have to maintain supply and demand balance, because otherwise people are laid off. And the elected officials would really want to care even if people are laid off, except that these laid off people have the right to vote. They have the right to vote, and that's what makes the officials care about unemployment. And so to eliminate the problem of unemployment, they kept creating new and more debt in the economy. Now, if you recall, in 1999, Clinton was president at that time, Bill Clinton, and there was that 1 year in which the government had a budget surplus. Surplus is the opposite of the deficit. Now, when the economy is running totally on debt, and here you have a year where there was a budget surplus, and I was watching the economy at that time, I said to myself, this is really bad. People are very happy, the politicians are very happy, they're touting this thing that we have a budget surplus finally, but since they don't know what's going on in the economy, this budget surplus means that supply will be greater than demand. Remember, you need a growing debt to make up for the shortfall of natural demand. So if there was a budget surplus, that meant there won't be enough demand in the economy. So supply would exceed demand. And I said to myself, this is 1999, and that means once supply exceeds demand, profits crash. Greenspan and company kept saying, we have very high productivity now, we have very high profits now, so we have a great economy. But they forgot the magical role played by debt. It's not just productivity. Debt was also going on, debt was also rising at that time. So I said to myself, these profits are going to crash, because now the economy has a budget, the government has a budget surplus, not a deficit. And when profits crash, stock markets also crash. So in 1999 itself, I wrote a book. The title of the book was The Crash of the Millennium. It was a play on the fact the new millennium was coming up. Plus, it wanted to emphasize that we are going to have a horrendous stock market crash because now we have a budget surplus. Now, everybody thinks budget surplus is a great thing, but not in the context where you need a deficit to balance the supply-demand picture. And sure enough, in the year 2000, we had a horrendous stock market crash. It didn't take long. The surplus appeared in 1999. A year later, you have a crash. Why? Supply is greater than demand, and that's the worst thing for profits. Goods have to be sold for businesses to make money. High productivity will only give you more production, but that production has to be sold. And you can't sell that production if people's wages are not rising. Somebody has to buy those goods, and people buy goods out of their salaries. So that's the foolishness, that's the folly of current economic theory. It doesn't really look at the importance of wages at all. And why? Because big business doesn't like rising wages. In their self-interest, big business doesn't like rising wages, and whatever big business wants,